Young and the Restless spoilers. The fight between Nikki and Victor doesn't erupt like ordinary marital conflict, the kind that burns hot and then cools into uneasy silence. This one feels like a final breach in a dam that has been straining for years, because it isn't only about the Abbotts, or even about business warfare the Newmans have survived 100 times before. It is about the moment Nikki realizes that Victor has crossed into something colder than ambition, something that cannot be shrugged off as strategy, and that the person she has defended through countless storms is now willing to gamble with forces he cannot truly control. The subject is AI, but the argument is really about Victor's obsession with dominance, the way he insists on winning even when winning threatens to destroy everything around him. Nikki, already raw from the endless cycle of justification and damage control, hears him talk like this and feels something inside her crack. It isn't simply disagreement, it is betrayal. It is the sickening recognition that Victor is not asking for her trust anymore, he's demanding her complicity, and he is expecting her to accept it as the price of staying by his side. Nikki's pain is not loud at first. It is the kind that makes the room feel smaller, the kind that drains warmth from her voice and replaces it with a thin, sharp clarity. She has spent years living with Victor's power, learning how to survive within it, how to love him despite the collateral damage he leaves behind, how to rationalize the ways he bends people until they break. But the Abbott War and the AI threat push her to a limit she has been approaching quietly for a long time. Because AI, unlike Victor's usual schemes, doesn't just punish the enemy. It doesn't stop at the target. It can destroy anyone, any business, any life without needing to look them in the eye. Nikki isn't naive. She understands corporate warfare. What she cannot accept is Victor embracing something that feels less like a weapon and more like a plague. When he refuses to listen, when he dismisses her concerns as emotional weakness or disloyalty, Nikki feels the old familiar fear return, fear that Victor will always choose control over love, always choose victory over family, and then claim he had no choice. In that moment, she doesn't just feel unheard. She feels erased. And when Nikki feels erased, she reaches for the one thing that has always been waiting in the shadows like a false friend. Alcohol does not solve her pain, but it gives her a way to blur it, to soften the sharp edges of humiliation and heartbreak that she cannot bear to hold in her hands. It is the most dangerous kind of comfort because it comes with the illusion of relief. The bottle doesn't demand explanations. It doesn't argue back. It doesn't tell Nikki she is overreacting. It simply offers numbness, and numbness feels like mercy when the person you love most is the person hurting you most. Yet Nikki knows, somewhere deep beneath the denial, that she is playing with fire. She has fought too hard to escape this pattern. She has survived too much. But desperation doesn't care about history. Desperation only cares about surviving the next minute. The night is thick and merciless when Nikki leaves the Newman ranch. It isn't a dramatic exit designed to punish Victor, but a flight fueled by an urgent need to breathe somewhere outside the suffocating gravity of his control. The ranch, usually a symbol of safety and legacy, becomes in her mind a gilded prison, filled with echoes of every promise Victor has made and every boundary he has broken. Nikki drives into the darkness with hands that feel unsteady, vision that feels slightly delayed, and thoughts that spin too fast to catch. The road stretches ahead like a narrow corridor, the kind that looks forgiving until it suddenly isn't. She tells herself she is fine. She tells herself she has done this before. She tells herself she just needs distance. But the truth is simpler and far more terrifying. She is not fine, and this time the world does not forgive her. It happens in an instant that feels both abrupt and strangely inevitable. A curve, a misjudgment, a fraction of a second where Nikki's body responds too slowly to what her eyes are seeing. The tires lose their grip. The steering wheel becomes meaningless in her hands. The car lurches, skids, and then the night opens up like a mouth. The vehicle launches off the edge and plunges down the cliff, metal screaming against stone, glass exploding into sharp glitter, gravity turning the world into chaos. The impact is catastrophic, not only because of the physical violence of it, but because of what it represents, the consequence of a fight that never should have reached this point. The consequence of a marriage where power has always been louder than peace. When Victor receives the news, it doesn't land as information. It lands as punishment. The kind that no amount of money, influence, or intimidation can undo. For a man who has built his entire identity on control, the sudden helplessness is torture. Victor's mind races through the argument, through the words he chose, through the coldness he allowed himself to display. And every memory becomes a blade. He doesn't just feel regret. He feels something worse. The awareness that he may have pushed Nikki toward the edge long before the car ever reached the cliff. He has always believed that his family's suffering is an acceptable cost of securing their future, that they will thank him later, that he will fix it afterward. But there is no after that can erase what has happened. There is only guilt, and guilt is a prison Victor cannot buy his way out of. The Newman family is shaken in a way that exposes how fragile their strength truly is. Shock moves through them like electricity, not only because Nikki is injured, but because everyone knows why she was on that road in the first place. They can pretend it was an accident. They can tell the world it was a tragic slip, a cruel twist of fate. But inside the family, in the private spaces where truth cannot be avoided, they feel the weight of Victor's stubbornness and Nikki's despair colliding into something irreversible. The accident becomes a mirror held up to the family's deepest fractures, the way Victor's wars keep dragging them into danger, the way loyalty is demanded rather than earned, the way love is used like a leash. Nikki's survival, if she survives, is only the beginning of the damage. Her injuries are not just physical, though those may be brutal enough to change her life. Her trauma will also be emotional, psychological, and profoundly isolating. Recovery will not be a straight line. It will be a war fought in small humiliations, learning how to trust her body again, learning how to sleep without waking to the sound of impact, learning how to face the shame of relapse without letting it define her, learning how to look at Victor without feeling either rage or the temptation to retreat into numbness again. The road ahead is long and punishing, and Nikki will have to confront not only the pain of what happened, but the truth of why it happened and how close she came to losing everything because the person she loves refuses to let go of his need to win. And Victor, for all his power, is forced into a rare and brutal reckoning. The accident robs him of the comforting illusion that he can protect his family by controlling them. Instead, it proves the opposite. His control is what endangers them most. He sinks into a guilt that doesn't fade with time because it isn't based on a single mistake. It is based on a lifetime of believing the rules don't apply to him, of believing that fear is an acceptable tool, of believing that love should endure anything he demands of it. Now he faces the price of that worldview in the most personal way possible. Nikki's pain becomes a constant reminder that power without restraint is not strength, that is destruction. In the aftermath, the Newman family will be forced to look at themselves without the comforting narratives they usually hide behind. The accident will not just be a tragedy, it will be a turning point, a moment that demands decisions. Will they keep enabling Victor's wars because it is easier than confronting him? Will they finally draw boundaries that mean something, even if it risks tearing the family apart? And if Nikki wakes up, if she begins the long journey back to herself, will she return to the woman who always found her way back to Victor? Or will she finally accept that love is not supposed to feel like surviving a storm every day? Because if Victor truly understands what this has cost, then the question is not whether he feels guilty. The question is whether guilt will change him, or whether, once Nikki heals, he will simply return to the same obsession with control that pushed her toward the darkness in the first place. The air in the living room of the new Newman ranch was so cold it could have cracked the crystal decanter on the sideboard. Victor Newman stood by the fireplace, his silhouette imposing against the crackling flames, but his eyes were fixed on his wife with a terrifying stillness. "You are testing my patience, Nikki," Victor said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room. "You threatened to leave me, to walk out on this family because of Jack Abbott." Nikki Newman stood her ground, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a rage she had suppressed for weeks. The tension had been building ever since Victor unleashed his stolen AI program to dismantle Jabot, a ruthless campaign that had gone far beyond business rivalry. "It isn't about Jack, Victor. It's about you," Nikki cried, her voice echoing off the high beams. "It's about this endless, vindictive need to destroy anyone who doesn't bow down to you. I told you to stop using that program. I told you to end this war before it destroys us. But you won't listen. You never listen. I do what is necessary to protect this family." Victor roared, stepping forward, his finger pointed accusingly. "Jack Abbott is a liability. He manipulated you. He staged that overdose to save you, humiliated us. He saved my life," Nikki screamed back, tears stinging her eyes. "And you hate him for it because it wasn't you. I am done, Victor. I am not bluffing this time. If you don't shut down that attack on Jabot by morning, I am leaving. And I'm not coming back." She turned on her heel, the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind her with a finality that made Victor flinch. Left alone in the silence, Victor's expression shifted from anger to a cold, calculating resolve. He walked to the window, watching the tail lights of Nikki's car fade as she drove down the driveway, likely heading to the stables or the guest house to cool off. She thought she was safe. She thought she could dictate terms to him. She needs to understand, Victor thought, a dark logic twisting in his mind. She needs to see how vulnerable she is without my protection. She needs a shock to the system. He didn't want to hurt her. Never that. But he needed her to feel first kind of fear that would send her running back into his arms, realizing that the world outside his fortress was dangerous. He grabbed his coat and slipped out the side door, moving toward the garage where Nikki's convertible was parked. The garage was dimly lit, the smell of oil and expensive leather hanging in the air. Victor popped the hood of Nikki's car. His hands, usually steady when signing billion-dollar mergers, moved with precise, mechanical intent. He wasn't cutting the line, he was loosening the valve on the brake fluid reservoir. Just enough to reduce the pressure. Just enough to make the pedal feel soft, to make the car harder to stop, perhaps causing a minor fender bender at the bottom of the drive. A small scare. A calculated risk to reassert control. "Forgive me, my love," he whispered into the dark engine block. "But you leave me no choice." Nikki didn't go to the guest house. She drove aimlessly for an hour, her mind a whirlwind of betrayal and exhaustion. The fight with Victor had drained her, leaving a hollow ache in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. She eventually pulled into the secluded parking lot of a roadside inn on the outskirts of Genoa City, the neon sign buzzing overhead. She sat in the car, staring at her hands gripping the steering wheel. The urge was sudden and overwhelming. It wasn't just the fight, it was the accumulation of months of stress, kidnapping by Jordan, the constant looking over her shoulder, and now the man she loved turning into a monster. She opened the glove compartment. She knew it was the raw small flask she had confiscated from a stable hand weeks ago and forgotten to throw away. It stared at her, metallic and cold. Just to numb the noise, she whispered to herself, her sobriety chipping away under the weight of her despair. Just one sip. One sip turned into a long pull. The burn of the alcohol was familiar, a toxic comfort that settled her shaking nerves but clouded her judgment. She sat there for another 20 minutes, finishing the flask, the world blurring slightly around the edges. When she finally started the engine again, her reflexes were dulled, her emotions raw. She backed out of the lot, the tires screeching slightly. She needed to go home. She needed to tell Victor that he hadn't won, that she was still leaving. The road back to the ranch wound through the cliffside passes of Genoa City, a treacherous stretch of asphalt bordered by a steep drop into the ravine below. Rain had begun to fall, slicking the road with a sheen of oil and water. Nikki took the first curve too fast. The car drifted, and she instinctively slammed on the brakes. The pedal went to the floor. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of alcohol. She pumped the pedal again. Nothing. The car was picking up speed, gravity pulling it down the winding slope. "No, no, no," Nikki screamed, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. She saw the hairpin turn coming up one with the flimsy guardrail overlooking the valley. She yanked the steering wheel to the left, trying to drift the car away from the edge, but the alcohol slowed her reaction time by a split second. The tires lost traction on the wet pavement. The car spun. The world became a kaleidoscope of headlights, rain, and dark trees. With a sickening crunch of metal, the convertible smashed through the guardrail. For a heartbeat, there was weightlessness, followed by the terrifying sound of the car tumbling down the rocky embankment, crashing through brush and stone until it came to a violent, shuddering halt against an ancient oak tree. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of steam and the distant roll of thunder. Victor was pouring himself a brandy in the study when the phone rang. It was the private Lineth one used by his security team. Mr. Newman, the voice on the other end was urgent. We've received a distress signal from Mrs. Newman's vehicle telematics. There's been a crash. Route 12, near the ridge. The glass slipped from Victor's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. The amber liquid pooled around his shoes, but he didn't notice. How bad? Victor demanded, his voice barely a whisper. The sensors indicate a high-velocity impact, sir. The vehicle went off the road. Victor's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Minor collision, he told himself. It was supposed to be a minor collision. He drove to the scene like a madman, his own car fishtailing on the wet roads. When he arrived, the flashing lights of police cruisers and an ambulance painted the night in chaotic bursts of red and blue. He scrambled down the muddy embankment, ignoring the officers trying to hold him back. Nikki! Nikki! The car was a mangled wreck. The front end was crushed accordion style against the tree. Paramedics were already there, carefully extracting a limp figure from the driver's seat. Victor froze. Nikki's face was pale, streaked with blood and rain. Her eyes were closed. She looked small, fragile, broken. Is she? Victor couldn't finish the sentence. She has a pulse, but it's weak, a paramedic shouted over the rain. Possible internal bleeding, severe head trauma. We smell alcohol on her breath, sir. The words hit Victor like a physical blow. Alcohol, she had been drinking. The combination of his sabotage and her relapse had turned a lesson into a massacre. He watched as they loaded her onto the stretcher, a wave of nausea rolling over him. He had done this. He had loosened the brakes. He had driven her to the bottle with his cruelty. He was the architect of this nightmare. The waiting room of Genoa City Memorial Hospital was a purgatory of fluorescent lights and hushed whispers. The Newman family had gathered, their faces masks of shock and grief. Victoria paced the floor, her phone clutched in her hand, while Nick sat with his head in his hands. Victor stood apart from them, staring out the window into the darkness. Every time a doctor walked by, his breath hitched. I don't understand, Victoria said, her voice trembling. Mom has been doing so well. Why would she drink? And the police said there were no skid marks before the rail. It's like the car just didn't stop. Victor stiffened. He could feel the weight of his secret pressing down on his lungs. Accidents happen, Victoria, Victor said, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. Especially on those roads in this weather. But she's an excellent driver, Dad, Nick argued, looking up. Even if she had a drink, to go straight through a guardrail. It doesn't make sense. We will wait for the investigation, Victor snapped, too quickly. He saw the flicker of confusion in Nick's eyes and forced himself to soften his tone. Right now, we must focus on your mother. The doors to the ICU swung open. Doctor. Nate Hastings stepped out, his expression grave. Family only, Nate said softly. Tell us, Nate, Victor commanded, stepping forward. She's in a coma, Nate said, not sugarcoating it. The swelling in her brain is significant. We've stopped the internal bleeding, but the next 24 hours are critical. If she wakes up, there may be permanent cognitive deficits, or she may not wake up at all. Victoria let out a sob and buried her face in Nick's shoulder. Victor felt the room sway. He reached out to the wall to steady himself. She may not wake up. He walked past Nate into the ICU room. The machines beeped in a rhythmic, mocking tempo. Nikki lay amidst a tangle of tubes and wires, her beautiful face bruised and swollen. Victor approached the bed slowly, as if approaching a shrine. He reached out and took her cold, limp hand in his. "My baby," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You must fight. You hear me? You have to fight." He squeezed her hand, hoping for a response, a flutter of eyelids, anything. There was nothing. "I did this," he confessed to the silence, the words tasting like ash. "I wanted to show you. I wanted to keep you safe. God help me." The door opened behind him. It was Chance Chancellor, now the chief of police. He held a clipboard, his face grim. "Victor," Chance said respectfully, "I hate to do this right now, but we need to ask a few questions. The preliminary report from the crash site is unusual." Victor slowly turned, releasing Nikki's hand. He composed his face into the mask of the great Victor Newman, stoic, impenetrable. "Unusual in what way?" Victor asked. "The brake lines," Chance said, stepping closer. The mechanic on scene noticed the valve on the rear line was loose. Not severed, but loosened. "It looks like tampering, Victor. Someone wanted those brakes to fail." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Victor looked at Chance, then back at his unconscious wife. The walls of the deception were already closing in. "That is impossible," Victor lied, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his gut. "Who would want to hurt Nikki?" "That's what we need to find out," Chance said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We'll be pulling security footage from the ranch. If someone got to her car, they had to have access." Victor nodded, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. The security footage. He had disabled the cameras in the garage for 10 minutes as a gap that any competent investigator would notice. "Find them, Chance," Victor said, the irony bitter on his tongue. "Find whoever did this." As Chance left, Victor turned back to Nikki. The guilt was no longer just a feeling. It was a living thing, eating him alive. He had tried to control her, to manipulate her into submission, and instead, he had shattered their lives. He leaned down, kissing her forehead gently. "I will fix this," he vowed, though he had no idea how. "I will protect you, even from the truth." But as he looked at the monitor tracking her fading heartbeat, Victor Newman realized with a chilling certainty that this was the one thing he couldn't control. The war with Jack, the business, the power, it all meant nothing. He had gambled with the only thing that truly mattered, and the house had won. Outside the window, the storm raged on, washing away the evidence on the road, but the stain on Victor's soul was permanent. The investigation had begun, and for the first time in his life, Victor Newman was terrified of what the morning would bring.